So today I saw an article that was posted which pointed out the fact that the surveillance state, more or less, to some degree, suffered a setback, which I always like to see. Like Louis Rossman, I think I tend to focus on the bad most of the time here on this channel. And in this video, I wanted to discuss the latest defeat that happened, right? Like, after months of kind of secret legal warfare, the UK government has been forced to abandon its demand that Apple actually build a global encryption backdoor into iCloud data. And this really represents the most significant privacy victory since Apple told the FBI to go screw during the San Bernardino case way back in 2006. Now, how this actually affects everything, no doubt, will echo far beyond just one company or one country, for that matter, for a while. This victory, in a way, even though it's like really small, it still demonstrates that resistance actually works, that corporations can be forced to choose sides, and that even surveillance states will back down when faced with determined opposition. More importantly, it shows us exactly how the next phase of the encryption wars will actually be fought. Just as a quick note, I am not pro-Apple. Like, I have two laptops that are Apple computers, but I'm a Graphene OS fan all the way, 100% in. It's no doubt the way to go. The UK government demanded blanket access to end-to-end encrypted cloud data for users on a worldwide scale. They still want to build that massive surveillance infrastructure that will compromise the privacy of every iPhone user on the planet, including millions of Americans. The demand came through something called the Technical Capabilities Notice under the Investigatory Powers Act of 2016. Definitely a mouthful. Most people know this law by its nickname, which is the Snoopers Charter. And how creepy is this shit? And so the legislation passed with really minimal opposition when it did pass. And it grants the UK government really sweeping powers to demand backdoors from technology companies. Now, Section 217 specifically allows governmental entities to force companies to remove encryption protections and install deliberate security weakness into their actual products. So when a country does this, they are, in fact, telling you that you are the enemy. That's it. There's no sidestepping that. The technical details do matter here. So when the UK issued this secret order in January of 2025, they weren't asking Apple to just unlock specific devices for like specific investigations. They demanded that the company fundamentally redesign iCloud's advanced data protection feature to include a permanent governmental backdoor access, right? Like, advanced data protection encrypts backups, photos, notes, and other iCloud data so that even Apple can't access it. My point is the UK government wanted that protection just eliminated globally. And in February of 2025, the company disabled advanced data protection for all new iCloud users in the UK. And this meant that British iPhone users could no longer actually access the highest level of encryption protection for their cloud stored data. Apple appealed the order through the Investigatory Powers Tribunal, with the UK government attempting to keep the entire case secret from public scrutiny. And when that failed, the demand would have created a systemic security flaw that would have affected Apple's global infrastructure on a global level. The technical implementation would have absolutely been devastating. It would have created a backdoor for UK authorities, and I say authorities because I dislike the term authorities. For those of you that are new viewers, like it's distasteful to say because they're not really authorities of anyone, right? Like, we're all free. Anyways, most of us free. Moving on. Basically, this was meant as a backdoor for them, and it would mean building in this vulnerability into the core encryption systems that actually protect all iCloud data. And there's no such thing as a backdoor that's selective or that only works for the good guys, which is the thing that governments love to try and sell. Once that weakness exists, it becomes a target for criminal hackers, foreign intelligence services, and authoritarian regimes worldwide. Now, this connects directly to the pattern of government encryption attacks that we've seen in the past. Like, remember the 2006 San Bernardino case where the FBI actually demanded Apple create custom software to break into a terrorist's iPhone. And Apple flat out refused, arguing that creating such a tool would actually establish a dangerous precedent in general. I absolutely agree with that. And undermine global security at the same time. And the FBI eventually did find a third-party hacking firm to supposedly break the encryption, but the legal precedent remained unsettled in actuality. And the UK demand represented an escalation beyond even the San Bernardino one that we just talked about, where the FBI wanted to access like that one specific device. The UK demanded a permanent backdoor access to cloud services used by hundreds of millions of people. They wanted to normalize government-mandated vulnerabilities that were that essentially were being manufactured in this civilian encryption infrastructure. And as weird as it sounds, American intervention actually proved decisive in actually stopping this overreach, right? So the U.S. National Director of Intelligence here in the U.S., Tulsi Gabbard, actually confirmed that the Trump administration directly pressured the UK government to abandon the mandate. And Gabbard stated that protecting American citizens' encrypted data became a priority for U.S. intelligence leadership, with Trump himself reportedly comparing the UK demand to surveillance tactics that are actively used by China. Now, while that is true, I'd also point out that here in the U.S., the government also regularly seeks to erode our privacy rights as well. I have to like completely reset here. This is supposed to be like a positive, we won kind of video, and I'm completely going off track with it. The US and the UK both share really extensive intelligence under agreements like Five Eyes, but American officials recognized that allowing the UK to weaken Apple's encryption would compromise American users' privacy as well. We should definitely not be so short-sighted as to believe that this was all done for our benefit or our security or they care about us. That is idiotic at best, right? But this created a rare instance where U.S. intelligence agencies actually prioritized civilian privacy over extended surveillance capabilities, probably because it would have messed with them, right? Again, they're not doing any of this to look out for us or to have our back or anything along those lines. Like, I can't, off the top of my head, I really can't think of an example where the U.S. intelligence agencies have tried to advocate for user privacy. It seems more like an anathema to them. Senator Ron Wyden and Representative Andy Biggs had written to Gabbard warning that UK backdoor demands constituted effectively a foreign cyber attack waged through political means. They argued that if Apple built backdoors for the UK, those same vulnerabilities would exist in American phones, in our tablets, and in the computers, undermining the security of federal, state, and local government agencies that actually rely on Apple products. And at that point, they weren't advocating for you and me. They were advocating for those local, state, and federal agencies, even though they are meant to represent us. That's who they were actually thinking about when they wrote these letters. The fact that they had to explain this to the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, in my opinion, is kind of telling, but whatever, right? Anyone can tell you that encryption doesn't work through geographical boundaries, right? Like, your PGP isn't contingent on if you're in XYZ country. And intelligence agencies understand this perfectly well, considering the fact they do a lot of exploitation. Snowden basically showed that the NSA and GCHQ deliberately target encryption systems because breaking them once provided access to vast amounts of civilian communications. And the UK demand followed this exact same logic that we've seen in the past, which is force one company to weaken their protection, then exploit that weakness for something like mass surveillance disguised as protection. And once the first company does it, it starts a trend, right? And starting with Apple kind of would have been a great running start for that specific surveillance state. Meta and Google said that they received no requests, similar backdoor demands from the UK authorities. And I have to wonder if that's because they already get all the user data just by acting like an advertiser and paying those companies for it. That makes sense to me. If we give Meta and Google the benefit of the doubt, though, which is stupid, but let's just do that. We can hypothetically then say that this suggests that the government targeted Apple specifically, possibly because iCloud's advanced data protection was among some of the strongest consumer encryption that's available. By forcing Apple to weaken this protection, the feds across the pond would have essentially eliminated one of the highest standards of privacy protection that's used by mainstream consumers. And that last part is very important. The Investigatory Powers Act contains the legal framework for this type of coercion. The law requires companies to notify the government about new security features before deployment. And that gives the government an ample opportunity to demand modifications or block the implementation entirely. And this represents a really premeditated prior restraint on privacy innovation in general, where government approval becomes necessary before companies can actually strengthen their products or strengthen user protection. And Section 253 of the Act specifically empowers governmental entities and agents to issue technical capability notices requiring companies to remove encryption or install surveillance capabilities. These demands can target foreign companies operating in the UK as long as they provide services to British users. The law deliberately constructs a global reach for British surveillance demands. And people have been talking about this since the Act's passage in 2016. The technical capabilities notices could be used to actually undermine encryption globally, not just within the UK borders, which is kind of the whole point of all this. The Act also expanded bulk surveillance capabilities, allowing the government to collect internet connection records for the entire population. Metadata surveillance combined with backdoor access to encrypted communications really would have created a perfect storm. Comprehensive monitoring infrastructure, so to speak, comparable to authoritarian surveillance states. Now, government officials constantly dismissed these concerns during legislative debates. Of course, they would. Absolutely makes sense. If you want more power, why actually acknowledge that you could become a tyrant with said power? Right? So instead, they just claimed that the safeguards would prevent abuse and that surveillance powers would only target legitimate security threats. Who's deeming what a security threat is? It absolutely makes no sense if you have an IQ of room temperature, right? The Apple backdoor demand really demonstrates how quickly those kind of assurances of there won't be any abuse really prove worthless when the governments gain legal tools for coercing compliance. Apple's resistance strategy was really effective because it basically imposed real costs on the UK government by disabling advanced data protection for British users instead of putting a backdoor in it. So Apple basically made the surveillance demand visible to the public by actually doing this. British iPhone users had suddenly lost access to the strongest encryption protections, which obviously created immediate awareness of governmental actions that would have otherwise remained secret. And this is kind of a boss move on their part, in my opinion. Good deeds are done in the light, right? So this kind of transparency really forced political accountability. And the UK government found itself kind of explaining why British citizens deserved weaker privacy protection than other users in other countries. And media coverage really highlighted kind of the global security implications, which made it difficult to try and frame them as demands that were just trying to save you from the evil terrorists. And it focused only on British law and the needs of law enforcement there. The legal challenge through the Investigatory Powers Tribunal added another pressure point. Apple's appeal forced the government to defend their demand in proceedings that, despite secrecy attempts, generated public documentation of the surveillance overreach. It would be great to see some of these ridiculous laws and acts that have been enabled, have people move to actually abolish them as well with this kind of momentum that exists right now. And again, like we established, this wasn't about the American users, right? That's the narrative. Apple's willingness to disable services rather than build backdoors, combined with the U.S. government's intervention, really created a perfect storm and sufficient pressure to force the UK's humiliating U-turn, which is what it's been dubbed. So this victory really kind of establishes important precedents for future encryption battles that I'm sure we'll see. It shows that tech companies can successfully resist backdoor demands by making the cost of actually imposing it have real consequences on the governmental policies and the governments that are trying to impose it. It also demonstrates that international pressure can be effective when surveillance demands actually affect users across a bunch of different borders. But again, one thing we should not get twisted is this is not something that was done for your or my benefit, right? This was done for the God level people, right? The ones who can commit federal crimes and not get charged for it. So this is bigger than just this specific case, right? Governments worldwide have been watching to see whether Apple would actually buckle and comply with the UK backdoor demands, and success would have absolutely encouraged similar mandates from other countries, creating a race to the bottom, so to speak, in kind of a global encryption standards. And this defeat really sends kind of the opposite message that backdoor demands will face determined resistance. And more importantly, that if you're in politics, you'll get bad PR. The technical precedent that was set really matters, and it matters equally. By maintaining that encryption backdoors are fundamentally incompatible with security, Apple really reinforced in concrete the cryptographic community's consensus against engineered deliberate vulnerabilities being put into the stuff that they use. The fact that there's even a debate is insane. Now, the technical stance kind of becomes harder for other companies to abandon when industry leaders like Apple demonstrate its importance through costly resistance. Now, the UK's Investigatory Powers Act remains fully operational. So that's not done or destroyed. And it, of course, encapsulates that the technical capability, notice powers intact with that. So they still have the ability to demand these encryption backdoors from other companies, or to target different technologies with similar mandates, and to see we're going to start encrypting user data, and companies have to disclose that to the UK government before they actually give users that privacy. So all this kind of invasive stuff still exists. It's still active. That's important, right, to know. These attacks are going to be ongoing, and it could have already happened. Someone could have already given in, and we just don't know, right? And recent amendments to the Act have actually expanded those surveillance powers in several areas. So the 2024 Investigatory Powers Amendment Act actually weakened some of those safeguards while giving government new tools for accessing communications data. The UK government will continue pushing for surveillance expansion despite this specific defeat. And in turn, everyone has to keep pointing out how screwed up that actually is, right? Like the European Union's ridiculous regulation to spy, which they've tried to hard sell on the backs of the empathetic, is that it's about child safety, and it includes provisions that could require chat control, which is a PC term for total spying, basically. Essentially, we require messaging scanning for encrypted communications. And Australia's Assistance and Access Act already allows their government to demand technical assistance from companies, including potential backdoor installations. So the kind of global trend that's really creepy that we're seeing right now towards surveillance legislation means this UK victory represents one battle in a much larger war. Like, privacy protection requires sustained resistance across multiple jurisdictions and technologies. Governments learn from each attempt, right? Adapting their kind of legal strategies and creepy methodologies and technical demands, basically, based on previous success and failures. And we see the stupid ID requirements now hitting the shelves in other countries. And the technology companies face increasing pressure to choose between compliance with surveillance demands and protection of user privacy. Apple's resistance in this case really kind of demonstrates that principled opposition can succeed, but it requires willingness to really accept a significant business cost and legal risks. But the most important lesson from this victory, that's what it is that resistance works. Like, the defeatist mentality that I think a lot of people have is really uncalled for, right? Government surveillance expansion is not inevitable, and privacy is possible, but only with a lot of effort. Like, when corporations refuse to comply, when users demand privacy protection, and when diplomatic pressure reinforces those kind of technical resistance that already exists, it undermines the surveillance state's will. And they, as we saw in this, retreat from that overreach, and they should. It's like reaching across a fire and getting burnt and you pull your hand back. It's just what it is. It's a natural reaction. Now, I will say, like, if I didn't already use Graphene OS, this move would give me a ton of inspiration to actually change over, but Graphene OS is the GOAT, man. Like, it's like, I do hope to see people build on this momentum. If they want to go with support companies that actually resist surveillance demands, that oppose legislation that mandates, crazy stuff like encryption backdoors and mandates technical solutions that preserve user privacy in the end. Basically, I think it's a big W for them. The surveillance apparatus will definitely regroup and try a different approach. And that's just kind of what it does. Like, they'll target other companies and other technologies and use other legal frameworks. And in fact, they probably already have. Every government that considered similar backdoor demands just watched the UK government basically get kicked in the teeth and forced into a humiliating retreat. Every tech company now has a blueprint for resistance. Now, if they actually use it, is a totally different thing, but consumers can ultimately choose their fate. And this is far from the end of this war. Like, it's just confirmation that we can actually win against them. Thank you for watching to the end. As always, I'll see you in the next video.